Hello, class. This is Friday, October 30th. This is Latin 101, Professor Barbara Wyman, and today we are going to tackle Chapter 4 of Latin via Ovid, Minerva et Arachne. And this chapter, Norma kicks it up a notch, and she gives a lot of new grammar. A lot of it we have sort of talked about in the other chapters, but today she formally introduces quite a bit of grammar, all of which is important, but it's not necessary that you understand it perfectly all at once, because even though the concepts are introduced, we'll be working with them, and when you see them within the translation, it'll help them make sense. And so also when you do the workbook exercises, that'll help too. So you can read over the explanations in the book as well as listening to this lecture. And again, don't worry too much if it doesn't make sense all at once, because these concepts will be reinforced in the following chapters too. So first of all, let's just see what we've got going on here in the word list. So for the first time, well, we've already seen how the nouns are listed formally as they're found in the dictionary as well, with the nominative singular followed by the genitive singular ending, domina, domini. And this genitive singular ending helps us to know which declension pattern will be used. And so we've had first declension nouns that end in A, and Norma has given us a few nouns that end in US because we did taurus earlier. And so she's going to start introducing a few more nouns that end in US, which are going to be typically masculine, before she gives us the whole declension. So again, she's just showing us things to come, although we've already done first declension. So we've got domina and dominus. Of course, the feminine is lady, and the masculine is lord. And dominus is also the noun used for the Lord in the New Testament. So we have experiencia, femina, forma, nomen. This is third declension, and that's not, we don't get that till next semester, but we just need to know it in its nominative form, means name. Superbia and tela, pride and loom. It's in the verbs that the listing has changed since last chapter. Last chapter we just had just one form of the verb, third person singular and plural. But now Norma has introduced the typical listing of a verb that you'll find in the dictionary. And if you see here, affirmo, affirmare, affirmave, affirmatum, she doesn't give the whole, or dictionaries don't give the whole word. They simply give the endings, and you have to hook them on to the verb. And I'm going to show you how to do that in just a minute. But you'll see that all of these words, or most of them, have these three other endings that will be attached to that, the stem from that to make the first, second, third, and fourth principal part. So more about that later. So we have affermo, ambulo, certo, debeo, dixit, doceo, esse, habeo, monstro, nego, quaeso, respondeo, scribite, simulo, tempto, and voco. The one thing to notice is that in the second ending, there's ARE, and then there's ERE. In this chapter, we are going to learn both about the verbs that have the ARE and the verbs that have the ERE. I'm going to show you in just a minute how we form the principal parts from the endings. But the verbs that have an ARE in the second principal part, known as the infinitive, are going to be known as first conjugation. the verbs that have the ERE, and they have that macron right there, although you don't have to worry about the macrons right now. Those are going to be second conjugation. So in the nouns that ended in A were first declension, and the verbs that have the ARE form in the second principal part are going to be the first conjugation. We decline nouns and we conjugate verbs. We also conjugate verbs in English, or in whenever we learn a foreign language, we learn how to conjugate verbs. So if you go down, you can see ARE, first conjugation, ERE, second conjugation, ERE, second conjugation, ERE, second conjugation, ARE, ARE, these are all first conjugation verbs, etc. The way that they're conjugated is the same. That's why we can learn them all at the same time. It'll be the same. We'll do the same process to conjugate these verbs, and in this chapter we're going to learn about the present tense. There's a few other verbs here, in particular essay, which is the infinitive of the to be verb. And it's a little different because since it's irregular, as it is in all the Romance languages and in English too, it doesn't follow a pattern of conjugation typical as these do. So we learn that separately. That's also in this chapter. And there have a few other forms. We're going to get the imperative or the command form. And then here's a verb that we're just only going to get as a vocabulary word, quite so, please. Then we have adjectives, which are going to modify the nouns. Irata, mea, periculosa, stulta, sua, temeraria, one of my favorite words, rash. Well, stulta, stupid, that's pretty fun too. And those are going to match the nouns that they modify. And of course the other words, etiam, huc, iterum, melius quam, mihi, nemo, and que, that enclitic. And so as we go through the chapter, vocabulary, y'all can go back and read this. I'm not going to go through every single bit of it, just to point out what they are. Norma talks about the infinitive. The infinitive form is the to form. It's going to be the second principal part. Okay, and I'm going to show you how to form that in just a second. The infinitive can be used in a sentence just in that form. We do it in English all the way. We might say, I want to go to the store. So to go would be the complementary infinitive. So in languages, if you use the form, the to form, as the infinitive, is called the complementary infinitive. So I desire to walk. So the infinitive can be translated all by itself without having the verb conjugated into its separate persons. So here it goes. I ought to call the goddess. Okay, so that's just showing that the infinitive can be used on its own in a sentence translated by its to form. And so now Norma is going to show you how to conjugate a verb. And instead of looking at the book, I've made my whiteboard, which I think shows a little bit better, although it's in the book too. And so you can look back at that as well. But let me get my whiteboard, because that way I can break it apart for you just like we're in class. So this is how the verb is listed in the vocabulary and also in the glossary or in Latin dictionaries. It has the O form, the dokeo, the first person, present tense, and then it has these endings. Okay, and so you have to form the principal parts yourself. And what you do is you go back to the consonant. In other words, the dokeo, then it's dokere, you hook that ERE by going back to the consonant. Okay, so how does that look if you do it? Well, it looks like this. You have dokeo, dokere, dokui, and doctum. Well, this one was given to you, doctum. Those are called the principal parts. First principal part, second principal part, third principal part, fourth principal part. Okay, so those are formed from this word plus the endings given to you in the vocabulary listing. So what do you do with those? Well, we're going to find out that for right now, we're going to ignore the third and fourth principal parts. We don't need those yet. So we're going to trim down what we need to memorize or use for right now, and we're going to only work with the first and second principal parts. This is the infinitive, the to form, and this means to teach. And to conjugate verbs in the present tense, first conjugation and second conjugation verbs, this is a second conjugation with the ERE. It's really simple. You whack off that RE, and that forms the stem. And this is what you'll write down. You'll write down doke, 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 doke. You'll write it down 6 times because that's first person, second person, third person, singular, and plural. So that's the infinitive with the RE whacked off. And then you write it down 6 times. And just follow this pattern. Latin's very regular. It's got a very straightforward verb system, which is nice. And then what we're going to learn next is our present tense endings. And the best thing to do is just to memorize them. OST, moose, tis, nt. OST, moose, tis, nt. And we usually learn them on the board, and we go over them and over them. Oops, my board fell on the floor. But here, we'll just go over them a couple of times, and they're listed in your book. OST, moose, tis, nt. Remember, we talked a little bit about on that first week when we had class together, is that Latin gets the meaning from the ending of the verb. There is no need for a separate pronoun. The pronoun is given, or the pronoun idea comes from the ending. So the O means I, the S means you, the T means he, she, or it, the moose means we, the tis means y'all, and the nt means they. In other words, there's only one word necessary. For example, dokeo means I teach, to get the meaning of the verb in Latin. There are separate pronouns which are used, but they're not necessary for the meaning of the word. So OST, moose, tis, nt. I, you, he, she, it, we, y'all, they. Okay, so now let's conjugate. We'll take the stems that we just formed, and very easy, we are going to write them down. If I could do this. O, S, T, it's tricky. Okay, oops. Moose. It's hard with the phone. Tis and T. There you go. So dokeo, I teach, you teach, he, she, or it teaches, we teach, y'all teach, they teach. So we've just declined the verb dokeo, dokere in the present tense. Okay, and so we'll work more with that later, but now let's look at the rest of the grammar. Sorry for that little board drop there. Okay, so that's what's happening on page 30. So you can look at that. read over that. The to be verb is formed irregularly, conjugating is irregularly, so we don't worry about whacking off the RE or anything. What we do in Latin is we just memorize the whole form, the whole verb. And it's also just better to memorize it and practice it. So we have sum est, sumus est sunt. Sum est, sumus est sunt. Sum est, sumus est sunt. And you'll notice there's some similarities on the other endings we learned. It was OST, mus, tis, nt. Well, this is MST, mus, tis, nt. So you can kind of see the pattern, but it's just easier to learn at sum est, sumus est sunt. I am, you are, he, she, it is, we are, y'all are, they are. And the infinitive esse, to be, can also be used as a complementary infinitive. We're introduced to the indirect object, which is the dative, to whom or for whom. The direct object is intended. I'm going to do a different lesson on that because the indirect object and the dative is sort of dicey even in English, and students usually need a refresher on the indirect object. So I'm not going to do that today in this video because it's already getting kind of long. But you can look over the examples of how the dative is used on this page. And then Norma refreshes us about the ablative case, which is this, the preposition plus the object of the preposition called the ablative. That's a review. And then she also talks about imperatives, which the imperative is the command form. Also, we'll talk about that a little bit later, as well as the vocative, which is the noun of direct address. This is one that usually gives students a little bit of trouble because we don't really pay that much attention to it in English. And so instead of cramming that explanation all into this chapter, what I'm going to do is stop this video now on the grammar, let you look over it, and then later on we'll go over that more carefully because this video, I'm afraid, it's going to be too long for me to upload into YouTube. So quickly, let's go back to the translation itself. Chapter 4, Minerva at Arachne. And remember, now we are going to be looking for verb form endings. Okay? So we have the declension endings and our verbs. And so let's see, as we go along, we're going to see, oh, formo. That's the one of the new endings we learned, OST. Formo would mean I form pictures and stories, okay? So as we go along, you're going to have to look for the different endings. There's woko, I call, doket, he, she, it calls, me, dokeo, okay, I teach me, that's I. So, oh, there's a dokere, to teach. So we have more forms of verbs to look at. There's another formo. So there's a cartare, that's the infinitive. So y'all are going to have more to look at. I see the other woko, monstrare, infinitive to show. But while you're doing all that, you can't forget about your case endings because there's your accusative. So, but Arachne has not wisdom. Okay, Arachne is going to be the rash maiden. She's going to have hubris. So, but Arachne has not wisdom. Negat, she denies Minerva as teacher. Bad news, Arachne. The maiden, rash. Okay, rash, maiden, an adjective. She praises herself, that's one of our words in our word list, and she exclaims. I form pictures and stories, accusative, better than melius quam Minerva. Nemo, no one is teacher to me. No one teaches me. Voco, non voco, I not call. I don't call Minerva, even though it's the first word. It's not the subject, it's the direct object. I don't call Minerva. No one me docet. No one teaches me. Doceo me. I teach myself. Okay.